Hey, what's going on? This is the Unpopular Counselor. I appreciate you for being here. As you see some things on the board, I look forward to sharing more with you on that of what entails the Burntout Story and what led me to writing the Burntout Story. So, although it may be hard to see in the light green down there, part 5 is technically what led to considering the idea of writing the Burntout Story itself. Part 5, believe it or not, here's a dyslexic perspective for you. It's the notion of when I graduated with a master's in counselor education upon the end of part 4, the Burntout Story, and the realization of how I needed to write about life since graduating high school and that of 2012. Part 1 extends from that of 2012 when I graduated high school to that of 2015 when I received my associate's degree. Why is part 1 important? Well, it's the notion of how easy it is for us to think that certain things throughout grade school are going to remain consistent after graduation. However, the realization upon the night of graduation was that there were some things that were going to be a series of events such as starting college and that next chapter of my life into adulthood. Why is this important? Well, something I didn't entirely consider before as I was going through the motions and just taking in the day of graduation, especially that night after getting dinner with some close friends and family. It's the notion of all the things that were additionally going to come in which I had to accept, which thankfully I was already accepted into college, so then the process didn't have to be as challenging as I thought it was going to be. However, what happened was upon my first semester at a four-year university, I was commuting because the cost of tuition to dorm is more than what I was willing to accept, nor was I willing to take out a loan my first semester, and that of take out a loan every single semester just to graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So ultimately what had happened in my first semester was not only did I realize I wasn't going to be able to afford the next semester, which was the spring of 2013, but what I also realized was upon the email in which I had sent to the dean of me not returning the spring and that I was going to finish the fall semester, of how easy it is for humans to make mistakes. What do I mean by that? Well, upon sending them the email, how they interpreted it was that of me not going to school anymore that semester, which didn't make sense for the fact the email entailed that I was not returning after the fall semester. So I got kicked out halfway, and ultimately I was going to classes and some of the professors were like, "What are you doing here?" And I was just like, "Oh, I'm just here to come to class." And they're like, "You're not on our roster anymore." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" And so ultimately what happens is I attend classes despite not being on the rosters, and then I have to go see the dean because the email wasn't enough, and then have a little exchange to the point where what they realized was they misread the email. And what I said to them, which I may not have mentioned in the Burntout Story, was, and a lot of this has changed from within, but it was the notion of me being upset how somebody could get paid 6 figures and not know how to read an email. So ultimately I started learning what I had to do as an adult in terms of not only take accountability for myself, but also take accountability for the mistakes that others already established within their profession in higher education. And somehow, some way, that would be humbling me onwards into my higher education journey. So thankfully, I was able to sell my motorcycle and give up all my savings so then I could take my transcripts to a community college. Why is that important? Well, one of the things that I didn't know before graduating high school is if you don't pay your tuition off by the end of that semester, you can't, one, sign up for classes the next semester. Two, you can't, if you want to take your transcripts elsewhere, you can't because they're going to hold them. And then three, within 6 months to a year, they're going to start tacking on interest for whatever it is that you owe remaining within the tuition. So that's just, in a sense, almost like a buyer's beware upon getting yourself into higher education. Why it's important to know what you're getting yourself into before you agree to it. Anyways, but getting the associate's degree in 2015 helped me with the transition of going to a 4-year university separate from the one I originally started with upon graduating high school. And the beauty of this was the credits I was able to take from here and transfer it over, and that's what led to, thankfully, an opportunity where not only was I able to transfer my credits to a 4-year university, but I was also able to transfer jobs with a new building opening up nearby, all the while getting an off-campus apartment to be a little bit closer within that area. Why is this important? Well, what I realized upon 2015 that I didn't entirely have in mind at 2012 was what I wanted to pursue in higher education. For those that are unsure when they first get into college, it's understandable. You're still figuring out parts of life. You're still figuring out your passions, your interests, and ultimately what's the gifts in which you possess that you have been gifted in the first place that make you unique, and how could you assist others with the way in which you share those gifts to them. And that had aided upon going into here with the notion of I was going to major in psychology, as that would aid while applying for a master's in counselor education onwards into part 3. But it's the opportunity that in a sense I gave myself, but from what was available around me, where it seemed like a lot at first to transfer to another college upon getting an associate's degree, transferring to another job upon the previous job in which I was working senior year of high school, and including also getting an off-campus apartment to myself, so then I would, in a sense, give myself a chance that I knew I was going to have to be within this area for approximately 4 or 5 years, depending on how much time went through. Even to the extent when I got my first apartment, I had a 5-year warranty on the couch, just in the notion of when this warranty is up, it's the time in which I should be done with graduate school. But I was humbled along the way when going into part 3, where as I was preparing myself, not to mention running for office in 2017, but as I was preparing myself for graduate school, there were some things in which I was still learning. One was that of how I thought a dean in the past would no longer be of an issue going forward. I would ultimately be humbled and surprised, not in the most pleasant way, of the reality to a bureaucracy and red tape, which is something that shouldn't be of a thing for any student to have to deal with, never mind the fact that most students are likely working, they have bills, they have a lot of responsibilities going on. So for someone in the higher education setting to drop the ball, it's sort of unacceptable. But we're going to get on into that a little bit more, which is why I wrote the Burntout Story, as I could have sought after legal compensation. But ultimately what I realized, just a great example as we're going into part 4 here, is I could have pursued legal compensation, but it would have meant I couldn't write the Burntout Story. And why does that matter? Well, it's all about giving yourself a chance to address the past in ways that you may not have given yourself a chance to address them in the first place. And for the education that I was pursuing, I was also learning parts of my past that I had to change via behaviors that I didn't see a need to address along the way. However, the higher education started bringing more things to my attention. And because of that, there were certain things that I was able to address early on that would aid me in the journey to applying for graduate school, including upon 2017 when I was taking graduate classes in my undergrad spring semester before getting my undergrad degree. So in part 4, which as you're going to see within this date is the notion of 2019 through 2021. Why is this important? Well, I ended up doing 2 high school internships in graduate school. So it was a 3-year graduate program. And I was anticipating upon starting graduate school, as you see in 2017, I thought I was going to graduate in 2020, but that was not my reality. So ultimately what I had to do is I had to take it on the chin for what was going on and how there were certain things, despite it being a counselor education master's program, where I had to, like I said, take in more in the fact of if I went to the dean as soon as I wanted to go to the dean, there would have been some things hashed out sooner. But just like the person who, in a sense, I had perceived at a time as a tremendous help with my journey to that of onwards into graduate school. But what I have realized was the expectation we carry for those in the higher education setting is dismissive of the fact they're human beings, and it's also dismissive of the fact that we don't always practice what we preach. What do I mean by that? With the Master's in Counselor Education program, one of the main focal points that was highlighted was mindfulness and the importance of being mindful as a counselor educator, whomever you're interacting with, and not to let yourself get out of hand. And how I carried that notion with me. So when I seen those in higher positions than me act out in ways where they didn't see a need to address certain parts of their behavior, it almost, like I said, it threw me off for the fact that I had to be accountable for certain things that other people weren't willing to address themselves. And that's ultimately what I realized in the professional setting, especially higher education, as people are pursuing higher education for their own good and their own personal status. But really what's important is what else is going on in their life. And why does this matter? Well, this ultimately is what led me to writing the Burntout Story, when I have realized that after this entire journey and all the life lived along the way, that I had to write about it, for the fact that I had an education that made me question parts of my life I didn't know I needed to question until those opportunities rose, and then to make use of that is only fair. So ultimately, going in, when I graduated in 2021, a dear friend of mine had mentioned the idea of going to California, and that was something where I'd never been on a plane before, nor have I really been on a state much. But I knew that was something that I needed to consider. So, part 5 is what made me consider charting this journey, all the while working simultaneously. So as you can see, there's 3 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and 1 year. So it was notion I assigned myself something that most would not, as it's easy for us to dismiss areas of our lives we have to address. But what happens is if we don't take the time to address it, it can consume other parts of our life that's essential to how we are trying to live long term. Why is this important? Well, it's the notion of writing this, publishing it, and the Burntout Story in 2022, and how that allowed me to chart all of this out. But what was fascinating is how it was part 5 while living it, working, writing, all of this simultaneously. This is why I was saying before, like a dyslexic perspective. This notion of living part 5 while writing parts 1 through 4 simultaneously. And that's the outline of the Burntout Story. So I appreciate you for being here, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next one.